Now we're on Daf Lamed Daled Omid Beis. And now the Gemara is going to come to a conclusion that even though the Ganov shechted the animal on Shabbos and incurred a Chiyuv Misa, nevertheless, Rabbah is going to assume that there's no Kim Lebed Rabbi. Now, until now, the Gemara was trying to assume that although Rabbi Meir rejects Kim Lebed Rabbi in case of Malchus and Mammon, and that has to do with the Sugivedim Zomimim of yesterday's daf, but nevertheless, he would concede that in the case of Misa and Mammon, we do apply the principle of Kim Lebed Rabbi. Comes along Rabbah, and he says the following: I don't know if I would accept Rabbi Meir lahalacha. I might accept the Chachamim that we do apply Kim Lebed Rabbi in the case of Misa and Mammon, but only in the case of Mammon and not in the case of Knas. Loka Mishalim Islay and Mesa Mishalim Lesle. But Shani Hani the Chidushu Shechid Shetor B'Knas. So Rabbah says the following: that although Rabbi Meir might be open to the possibility of extending, or I shouldn't say extending, I should say applying Kim Lebed Rabbi in case of Misa and Mammon, and in that sense we're on board with Rabbi Meir if he goes that far as to concede that Misa and Mammon we apply Kim Lebed Rabbi, but not in the case of Knas, and that's called Chidushu Shechid Shetor B'Knas. Rashi explains that every case of Knas is a case where we don't know why he's paying this money. It's not compensation. And if it's not compensation, then it's a chidush. And if it's a chidush, it has its own rules and regulations. It dances to its own tune. And in this context, we're going to suspend the principle of Kim Lebed Rabbi, which Rabbi Meir could accept in the case of Misu Mammon, because the Mammon here is Knas. And Afal Gav de Miktal Mishalim. Even though we're going to be putting him to death, nevertheless, he will pay the Knas. And in the case of Daled Vehei, we're dealing with a Knas. There's no reason in the world why the Nigdav, whose animal was stolen and then shechted, should deserve Daled Vehei. But the Torah is Makadesh it, and that Knas has its own rules and regulations, and it's impervious to the principle of Kim Lebed Rabbi. And if he has the Rabbah Litamei, Rabbah is very consistent that in the case of Knas, we say Meis Mishalem. The Omar Rabbah Hayagadi Konavlo. If Erev Shabbos he stole a Gedi, Utvacho Shabbos, and he shechted it on Shabbos, Chayav, he's going to pay Daled Vehei. And we're not going to apply the principle of Kim Lebed Rabbi. Why not? Because it's a Knas. And Rabbah holds that with regard to Knas, we suspend the principle of Kim Lebed Rabbi, and he gets both Misa and he pays the Knas. But this is only in a case where he stole the object on Erev Shabbos. Why? Because on Erev Shabbos, when he stole the animal, he's chayav to pay Keren and even Kefel. And Kranis chayav b'gneva kodev chiyovel l'deisa Shabbos. So therefore, once the Chiyuv Keren was engraved in stone and emerged on Erev Shabbos, now we're going to add another Chiyuv of Daled Vehei when he shechts it on Shabbos, even though he incurs the Chiyuv Misa, but with regard to Knas, so now he's going to pay a package deal of Daled Vehei, Aval, but in a case of Ganav v'Tovach b'Shabbos, he stole it on Shabbos. And the moment he stole it, he incurred a Chiyuv Melecha Shabbos. We'll see how he did that magically in just a moment. And Tovach b'Shabbos, and then he shechted on Shabbos. Potter. He doesn't have to pay for the Gedi. He doesn't have to pay for the Gedi, and certainly he doesn't have to pay Knas. Now, wait a second. What's going on over here? What do you mean he doesn't have to pay for the Gedi? Rabbah only said that Kim Lebed Rabbi applies in a case of Knas. Why doesn't Kim Lebed Rabbi apply? Why don't we suspend Kim Lebed Rabbi according to Rabbah? right? In the case of knas, we don't apply kimle b'rabimine. And the answer is, if ein gneva, ein tvichu mechira. If he's potter from the keren, then there's a package deal. It's an entity that cannot be subdivided into its parts of daled ve'hei. It's all 4 or all 5, depending on seh or shor. And here he doesn't have to pay the knas. Why? Not because of kimle b'rabimine. Kimle b'rabimine doesn't apply in the case of knas according to Rabbah. But he doesn't have to pay the knas because if there's no chiyuv keren, that's called the main gneva, then there's no tficha mechira, there's no dal ve'hei. It's a package deal, as we said before. So why doesn't he have to pay for the keren? And that's what the Gemara is going to explain, that this kimle b'rabimine on keren, because that's mamon and not knas. And the very moment he incurred the chiyuv gneva, when he took the animal out of the rishus bailim, which is rishus hayachid, and brought it into rishus harabim, and he made a kinyan mishicha, at that moment he incurred a chiyuv from meleches hotzah mirshus l'shus, and therefore we're going to apply kimle b'rabimine. Once we apply kimle b'rabimine to the keren, then even Rabbah agrees that we're going to apply kimle b'rabimine to the. Well, that's actually not accurate. It's not that he's potter for daled ve'hei because the kimle b'rabimine doesn't apply to a knas, but he's potter because in ein gneva, ein tvicha mechira, which is a sugya in Perek Meruba in Bava Kama.
In ein gneva, ein knas.
Correct, because the daled ve'hei is one entity. We cannot subdivide it. Either you chayiv all or nothing. And if you're not chayiv the keren, and we cannot be mechayev you the daled ve'hei, which is really gimel v'daled, if you consider, because he already incurred a chiyuv kefa. V'yomar Rabbah. Furthermore, another din that Rabbah said, hayigdi ganavla. Okay, now we're learning a sugya called ba b'machteres. Ba b'machteres, when a burglar breaks into someone's house, he's, so to speak, don't take me literally on this, he's chayav misa. Where's Joe? Oh, he's chayav misa.
All right, Roberto, so have we resolved now the hechatim to that Rabbah would say for the explaining Reb Meir?
So this is a sugya earlier about gorer kis b'Shabbos. If you remember on the previous amud, that when he drags the kiss out of the rishus habaylim to steal it, then when he gets to rishus harabim, what he does is he throws the kiss from one hand to the other. The second hand catches it below gimel tfachim.
Right. No, I mean, before we get now this Omar Rabbah, have we resolved, or are we still in the middle of the water with regards to the Bryce that, like, in other words, Rabbah's explained
so even though he was Tovech al Yidei Atzmo, nevertheless, Rabbi Meir holds the incurs of Dal Ve'hei. Why? Because there's no kimle b'rabimine. Even if I hold that Rabbi Meir concedes in Misa and Mama there is kimle, but not in the case of Knas.
But he has to explain that he was going to it before Shabbos.
Right, because if he wasn't going to it before Shabbos, but rather he stole it on Shabbos, then there would not be Keren, and main Gneva ain't Tvicha Mechir. Okay. Now what happens? This is similar to the case where he stole on Erev Shabbos, and he stole it Shelo b'machteres. Utvacho b'machteres chayav. Why? Because Daled Ve'hei is Knas, and with regard to Knas, we do not apply the principle of Kimle b'Ramini. So he has to pay for the Tvicha. However, However, if while he was in the machteres, he stole the animal and then he shechted the animal in the machteres, he's not chayav for gneva. The reason for that is because gneva is mamon, we're talking about keren, and we apply the principle of kimle b'ramine if he stole it while he's in a machteres. Now, please keep in mind that this is different than a real chiyuv misa. When we spoke earlier about Chil Shabbos, that's a full-fledged chiyuv misa. We take him out to the Beis Haskila for violating the Shabbos. Here, we're talking about Bava Machteres. that's a temporary situation where he's considered a mechuyev misa only on a temporary basis. Once he gets himself out of the machteres and he's still alive, Balabais cannot kill him. He's not chayev misa. But for those moments that he's in the situation of machteres, he's chayev misa, and therefore, if he steals something while he's in the machteres, he's potter from keren because of kimle b'derabine, because Rabbah holds that in misa and mamon, even Rabbi Meir would concede that we apply kimle b'derabine. Now he went and he shechted in the machteres after having stolen in the machteres. We're going to apply the principle of him ein kan gneva, ein kan tvicha mechira. If he's not chayiv keren because of kimle b'derabine while he's in the machteres, he's not going to be chayiv for tvicha mechira. And even though tvicha mechira and dalit vehei is a chiyuv knas, and therefore there's no kimle b'derabine, so we don't care one iota about the fact that he's in a machteres. But the chiddush of Rabbah is that since the gneva took place while he was in the machteres, and therefore he's not chayiv keren, because as far as keren is concerned, ein remisin also machayvim keren, which is mammon. Therefore, ein kan gneva, ein kan tvicha mechira.
How's he stealing it? How's he stealing while he's in the machteres?
Oh, Joe is here. I don't know. Where is Joe? I hear his voice. Or is it a shade? Where?
Over here.
Now you pick up the camera. Now I can see your pretty face.
Over here. That's Ernie. How's he stealing it while he's in the machteres? He's not in yet.
He's in the machteres. And he
He
steals it while he's in the machteres. That's usually what a burglar does. He steals things while he's in the machteres. Shalone da. We should know from him. But if you catch him on time, you could actually kill him.
The concept of I don't think we have time, but the concept of machteres is he's coming in, right? Once he's inside, he's not in the machteres anymore.
No, he's in the machteres until he leaves the machteres. As long as he's in the machteres, you can kill him.
But he's in the rishus of the Balabayas, though.
Correct, but the rishus of the Balabais is called the machteres now. Why? Because he broke in and he's still in the machteres trying to steal whatever he can. So the Balabais is going to try to defend and protect his property, and the Bava machteres is going to take out a gun, and therefore the Balabais is allowed to kill him first. There's a sugya psachim that maybe you learned in Daf Yomi. Okay, let's go on. Let's hold on to our questions.
Okay.
Yeah. We're going to have to hold on to our questions because we have, I think, about 12 minutes left. So let's see what we can accomplish in 12 minutes. I'm willing to stay here later. But you guys have to eat breakfast, so I don't want to keep you.
We have to daven still.
Okay, you can eat breakfast and then daven. It depends. Do you eat in order to daven or you daven according to eat? Okay, fine. I'm just joking. Anyway. So what happens now? Utsricha. The Gemara says we need both statements of Rabbah. Let's go through the two statements. Statement number one, the Ashmin and Shabbos. If Rabbah had told us his din about a case of someone who was Tovech b'Shabbos, and he didn't mention a word about Machteres, we would have said that in case of Machteres, of Shabbos, he's potter from Tashlum, because that's a real Chiyuv Misa. Mishum di Surah Isur Olam. Once he violates the Shabbos, he's chayav misa. We're going to take him out to the Beis Haskila. Aval machteres isur shahavi. It's only a temporary status of chayav misa, and in that case, we might have thought that Rabbah would agree that he's chayav in tashlumin. We can't be lenient on him because he's not really chayav misa. And again, we're focusing now on Gneva, which is Keren. Emalo. Perhaps we would say that this is not a real Chiyuv Misa. And if it's not a real bona fide 100% Chiyuv Misa, but it's only a temporary situation, and it cannot pater him up from Lamon. V'yeshmin Machteres, and in the case of Machteres, we're going to say that he's potter from Tashlumin. I might think that Dafka in the case of Machteres, he's potter from Tashlumin. Mishum de Machtarto Zui Hasra also. because he doesn't require asra. The balabais is allowed to take his life, the life of the Bab Machteres, even without asra. So you see, the Torah is very machmir in the case of the misa that this Bab Machteres is chayav on. He's chayav misa even without asra, similar to what we learned in the previous daf about Edom Zomim that don't require asra. Avol b'Shabbos the boy asra. Aim low, that's not a full-fledged chiyuv misa it doesn't size up if we compare it to machteres, and therefore we're not going to say that such a second-rate chiyuv misa would patter him up from mammon. Mammon, we're talking about keren. Tzricha. Amar Papa Haisa para gnuva lo utvacha b'Shabbos chayav shekranis chayav b'gneva konchi yavel deisa Shabbos. Please make note that Rav Papa repeats word for word what we just learned from Rabbah with one change. Instead of a gdi, it's a para. But then he goes on and he says, "Hoisa para she'ulalo." If he borrowed someone's para, utvacha b'Shabbos, patur. In other words, in the case of a para she'ula, the para is considered to be in the reshus of the bailim, because they own the para, as long as it's a lot. And therefore, when he went ahead and he shechted, he violated the Isur Shabbos, and at that moment, he stole it from the bailim. So we have a case of chiyuv misa, chiyuv tashlumin, bo kiecha, that's called be'idna. And therefore, we're going to apply the principle of kim levi the rabbin, and he's potter. Amalei ravacha, braid the rav ravashi, rav papa, parasin, give it a break. Rav Papa is saying that the halacha of Rav applies not only to a gedi, but even to a para? Ridiculous. Amalei, no. When he discusses the Reisha, that's only a segue to the Seifa. Amalei, Rav Ashi responds to Rav Acha, Rav Papa, she'ula salashminon. There's a gavaldige chiddush in she'ula. Salke daita chamina hoel v'yom Rav Papa. We have halacha Rav Papa called l'mafreya. What does l'mafreya mean in the case of shoel? From the very moment that a person takes a she'ela, he borrows something, at that moment he incurs a chiyuv mama. Again, it all depends on whether the animal dies or not. But if the animal dies, even ba'ones, in circumstances that are mitigating beyond his control, nevertheless, from the moment of she'ela, he has to pay. And how do I see this in Rav Papa? From the moment that the shoel is mashil the object, he has to pay for mizonos. He's going to have to pay the support in order to sustain the animal, because he's already, so to speak, a part owner of the animal. If we apply that logic here, he should be chayav for onsim l'mafreya. So the onus happened at time T2, but he's already chayav for onsim at time T1 at the moment that he took it to she'ela, because his mashicha, when he takes it into his reshus as a shoel and kol hanashalo, he has a mixas kinyan. It to some extent belongs to him. And therefore, already before Shabbos, when he took the animal, he already was chayav for the keren because of the Lamafreya principle. And therefore, when he was tovech b'Shabbos, he's chayav for tashlumin because the chiyuv misa eino ba yachad im chiyuv tashlumin ala para. The chiyuv tashlumin on the para was chal earlier, and therefore, since we apply Lamafreya, we would have assumed that he's chayav for tashlumin, and there's no kimle with Ramine here because the chiyuv tashlumin was generated already at the time that he took the she'ela. Mashmallah, Papa wants to be machadish that as long as the par is still alive, the shoel is not considered the bailim, because what he has to do is return the animal to its proper owner, and therefore the chiyuv gzela is not incurred, is not generated at the time of the she'ela l'mafreya, but rather from the moment of tficha. And at that moment of tficha, he's chayav for Melecha Shabbos, and that chiyuv misa knocks off the chiyuv geneva. Again, even if you assume, like Rabbah, that in Knas we don't apply kimler or anything, but we're talking about in ein geneva, ein kan tficha mechira. Amar Rava, A man dies and he has in his possession his estate a para she'ula. Did we say 2:15 or 2:10? I forgot.
2:15.
2:15. So we still have 6 minutes or 5. Anyway, the father died. He left a para she'ula, and now he still has, let's say, 15 days left to the she'ela. So the Yarshim, the heirs, are allowed to use it for the balance of the she'ela. However, Mesa, ain't chayovim bonsa. They were never makabel on themselves a chiyuv onsim. It means that she'ela has 2 parts to it. It has the rights to use the animal, and it has a chiyuv onsim. The chiyuv onsim is independent of the right to use the animal. And in the nafkamin is the case of the Yarshim, although they retain the right to use the animal and benefit from it, they are not chayv onsim because they weren't makabel onsim. A shoel has to accept upon himself achrayis for onsim. However, because Vurim Shaladiyim, they made a gross error, and they thought that this animal belongs to their father's part of the estate. Utvachua, and they shechted vachua, and they ate it. Mishalmim demei basar bizol. They have to pay 2/3 of its market value price, which is always the price that you pay when you get hana from something. Ayin sugya bava kama legabe the chiyuv of shein v'regel. Is he if the father left a piece of karka, and therefore the father has karka mishubedes that has a lien, L-I-E-N, vis-a-vis the mashil, the owner of the cow, then the owner of the cow could collect the entire value of the cow, 100%, not 2/3, from the yarshim. There are 2 interpretations of the Sefer. That last comment of Hiniach Lema V'Machrayis L'Chosim Hayovim L'Sham. Some say it goes back to the Reisha, and that's the case where the father died and he left a para, and since he left a para and he had a shibud nechasim, then we're going to say that the Yarshim will have to fork over this karka that has a shibud on it in lieu of the payment for the shar that died. The Ika de Masli Sefer, some interpreted that it's a reference to the Sefer, not a case where the animal died of natural causes, but rather a case where the heirs were working the animal, and then they decided to shech the animal and eat its basar. In that case, if there's shibud nechasim, they'll have to pay basically the entire value of the shar. If you interpret that this last statement about hiniach lehem achrayis nechasim, he pays the whole value and it's collected from the lien. If it's going back to the Reisha, then how much more so on the Sefer? The Sefer, these Yarshim are guilty of actively shechting the animal and eating its basa. Surely we should be more machmir on them and allow the Mashil to collect the full value from the lien. And upligi are Rav Papa, because Rav Papa holds that the chiyuv she'ela emerges at the moment of the death of the animal. Whereas if, as Rava had it, we go back to the moment of the she'ela when the father was alive and he took the animal and he was mishabed his nechasim, then we're saying that the chiyuv onsim goes to mafreya. But as we prove, Rav Papa rejects the concept of mafreya. But uman demasli or sefer. But if you interpret that in the sefer will be machmir to collect the full value of the shar from the shubadim, because in the sefer the yarshim actually shechted the animal and ate it. If the animal died a natural death by onsim, then we're not going to force the yarshim to cough up the shibud karka, because after all, in the case of the Reisha, they had every reason to believe that that this animal, if it dies a natural death, we don't have to pay for that. We never accepted upon ourselves a chiyuv onsim. But in the case of, right, aval reisha lo, but I'm sorry, In the case of the Seifa, they'll have to pay the full value through the Shiva Nechas because they deliberately shechted the animal. And they should have known better. They should have checked it out, whether it really belongs to their father or maybe it was a Shayla. But in the case of the Reisha, where the animal died be'onsim, so there, we're going to accept the principle of Rav Papa. We're not going to say L'mafreya, and they only have to pay for, let's say, Pshia, or for Gneva Aveda, but they don't have to pay for onsim. And that fits in very well with Rav Papa. So at this point, Rabbosai, we're going to officially end the shir because it's 2:15. I don't want to keep you longer. If anybody wants to stay and ask questions or review any of the points, I'm going to assume that tomorrow, Blinetta, we can start with Bichlema Rabbi Yochanan. Tell me if that's okay.
Yes,
Again, we'll
yes.
hopefully, it may take a few days, but we'll catch up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Shkoch, if anyone has questions, now's a good time to ask.
I got questions, but I'll have to stay for next time. I gotta go.
Joey, there's an answer to your question, but he's gone. Anyway. He brings down from the Shita, Joe's question, and it's a good question about how does the gun of, in the case of Machteres, so when he came into the person's house, so where's the Geneva? When did the Geneva happen? Like you said, the cases where he was in the tunnel when he did the Geneva, but how does it? That is, if he came in through the Machteres, and now he's and he took the article, and then he's back in the Machteres. So
where's the Shita Mekubetz? I don't know if I can. It's
the art scroll brings it down here in a note, but in other words, because the question is that when is the Baal Bais allowed to kill him? He's allowed to kill him when he comes in. If he's already on the way back out, theoretically.
So I thought he killed him before he was on his way out. That's not the Shita Mekubetz.
Well, the Shita Mekubetz says that the idea is that he says the Hechatimtza is that the guy came into the house, and then so the Baal Bais can kill him then, like he came into the house and the Baal Bais, and now he goes out the Machteres.
But and again, when did he steal it?
So in other words, his act of stealing really was when he took it out of the Baal Bais's Rishus into the Machteres on the way out. And that's when he did the Shkita, so that the Shkita and the Gneva were happening at the same time.
I don't have the Shita in front of me. Can you read it to me out?
Well, in other words, what he says is that the case is where the thief entered the house without Machteres, without tunneling, and in other words, and therefore he's not chayav miso when he comes into the house, and he stole the tleh, and then when he stole the tleh, he becomes chayav for Geneva, and then when he's coming out, leaving the Machteres, that's when he did the tvicha. So he's saying you have to say that Rashi holds, like, he's explaining Rashi, the Shita Mekubetz says, that Rashi holds that you're allowed to kill the Ganav who's going out from Machteres, even if he's on the way out of the house.
Okay.
But he says,
I mean, that really requires more study than the laws of Machteres, right?
He says there's a problem with that because the Rambam says that once you're leaving in the Machteres, you're not chayav, and you can't, the guy can't kill him anymore because he's not afraid of being killed. As the Baal Bais should not have a right to kill him when he's on the way out of the Machteres.
Probably the Rambam means because he can't protect his property. Once the Ganav has it and he's on his way out, well, the whole head to kill him is because, HaTorah, al sof daito shel adam, know, that a person protects his own property. Maybe now it's too late to protect his
Well,
property.
also, isn't the idea that when he comes in, you're worried he's gonna kill you? He's gonna kill the.
He's going to
Ganev's
kill
gonna
you if you stand,
Balabais?
if you confront him, Bobby. If you
Yeah,
confront him,
yeah. But when
because the
he's on the way
Chazal
out,
say that a person has a right to protect his mammon and confront the Ganev, and now he's going to kill the Ganev because if he doesn't kill the Ganev is going to kill him.
right, but when he's on the way out,
Maybe he
you
can't
know,
protect his property anymore. The guy's on his way out, or maybe the guy is no longer a threat to his life, whichever way you want to say it.
anyway, but you have to figure out what's the hekatimta that you should be chayiv for, that you had the geneva, and how do you have a case where you had the geneva and then he was chayiv misa, like for machteres, and then he did the tvicha mechira under that circumstance. So you have to figure out the hekatimta.
All right, my Gemara doesn't even talk about that. I'm not trying to.
But Robert, what's the case? Explain the case? What's the case?
I thought the case was as long as he's in the Balabais' house, he's called a Baba Machteres. You're saying that Baba Machteres is only when he's in the tunnel. So I'd have to really research.
No, I'm not saying that. But if he came in the, let's say he came in the Machteres, so that he's chayav misa already.
But he remains chayav misa until he goes out of the Balabais' rishus.
Right, but we need
a long
to find
period of time.
But we need
and
to
during
find
that period
case,
of time, he stole an animal and he checked the animal.
But we need to find a case where he did the geneva before he was chayav misa.
Oh, so that he says over here, hitmin gdi tachas knofav. He took a gdi. Again, I don't know how you learned Daf Yomi. I mean, today I should say, we did some very profound sugyas, the least of which is your question. Again, I'm not trying to in any way belittle it, but if that's the way you do Daf Yomi, it's a whole different way than I do Daf Yomi.
No, it happens.
You could have asked me 1,001 questions on the daf, really profound questions. I have here pages and pages of Rishonim, and this question that you asked doesn't even appear here. But anyway, that's a different question.
It just
so look,
that Joe asked. It just happens that Joe asked that question.
So for tomorrow, again, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. For tomorrow, we're up to Bishleimer Rabbi Yochanan. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're going to try to see what does the daf look like for tomorrow. Lamed Hey.
The actual.
Yeah, it might be a little bit easier, so maybe we can catch up. Okay, then.
Very good. Have a good day.
And I just want to reiterate one point: that if we were to learn this entire daf properly, it would take literally a month. There are so many sugyas. There's an overlap here of probably 15 different sugyas and shots.
No.
And the question as to whether he's in the tunnel or he's outside of the tunnel, where again, if we were learning Baba Machteres, that would be great for a Daf Yomi shir. But Baba Machteres comes into this sugya as what I would call number 100 on your list of priorities. No offense. I'm not saying.
That's the question that occurs to somebody, So
right. That I can't be responsible for. Those nuances, because my goal in preparing for Daf Yomi is to get the shakla v'tarya, to understand the machlokas.
For sure.
I don't know if you caught this, but I integrated a lot of lumbus into the shir, way beyond the normal Daf Yomi shir. But anyway, I'm not trying to give myself credit, but maybe I am.
It was very good, very good, really.
Okay, then.
Very clear.
So the only thing is,